Welcome to Royalwood Church, and thank you for joining us online. If this ministry has impacted your life in any way, please share your testimony by sending us an email at media@royalwood.cc. We would love to hear about your experience. If you would like to give to the church financially, you can do so online at royalwood.cc. Simply click on the Give tab. Once again, thank you for joining us online. Please open your heart to receive a word from God today.
From Jeremiah the 31st chapter, verse number 1, at the same time, saith the Lord, will I be the God of all the families of Israel, and they shall be my people, thus saith the Lord. The people which were left of the sword found grace in the wilderness, even Israel, when I went to cause him to rest. Verse number 2, just a few words there I want to lift out of that verse. They found grace in the wilderness. And for just a little bit this morning, I want to talk to you about blessing from an unexpected place. Blessing in an unexpected place. Turn to somebody and say, let's help our pastor today to preach the word, and then you can be seated. You know, there's times that I think sometimes I kind of help the Lord out on his job, because sometimes I tell him what I think he ought to do. Tell him a lot of times, and you know you probably do this too, I tell him the time he needs to do it, and then I usually tell him the way he should go about it. Here's a good way for you if you hadn't thought of this, Lord, who knows everything. But that's the way we are, and so there are times that I can tell him I need a blessing, and then something will come along and it'll be like, God, this would be a real good place for you to go ahead and give me that. Have you ever been in one of those places where you needed some help financially, you needed some financial blessing? Just raise your hand if you ever had one of those deals where you needed God to really come on the scene. I remember, and I saw this in the paper today, the front page of the Chronicle, Dan Spence, who has a home out, he was an oil man from long ago, and we had some friends that knew them, and we were out in the woodlands one day, and they said, let's go by Dan Spence's house and see if he'll let us see it, you know, and it's over 30,000 square feet, and we drove, or they made a phone call, and he said, yeah, y'all come on up. And so we went to the house and began to tour it, and it was something to behold, and at that time it was on the market for $19 million. And we just walked around and said, my mouth was just hanging open. And I said, well, what does it cost to just maintain a place like this? He said, oh, somewhere in the $200,000 a year range. And that's not the payment, that's just maintaining things. And he said, I said, are anybody looking at it? They were trying to sell it then. He said, yeah, there was a preacher that came and looked at it. Wow. Where is he pastoring? I said, well, how do people get to come look at it? Because I didn't see a sign out in the yard. It wasn't listed. And what has to happen, you have to put up a letter from the bank, a letter of credit that you can afford the house before you can come and even look at the place. And so people that are coming, they're not saying, well, what's the payments going to be? I mean, they got to already know this. And so because of the oil boom and the luxury home market being flooded and many other things, I just saw today on the front page of the Houston Chronicle that he's going to sell it for $6+ million, 19 to 6. He took quite a bath on that situation. But we were walking around talking, and I thought, you know, here's a guy that's got money. This is back several years ago, maybe a couple of years ago. And I thought, you know what? What could he do to help us? At that time, we needed something which we do all the time. And I just thought, boy, the Lord could move on him. And man, there's no telling what a guy like that could do. And so as we walked around that palatial house and looked at it, it had like 8 master bedrooms with huge bathrooms. It had 9 kitchens, and I can't even remember all of the stuff. And a professional basketball coach lived right next door. And I just looked at all that, and this was the thought that came to my mind. This would be a good place for the Lord to bless me. And at the end, he asked us if we would pray, and we were praying, and I prayed, and I thought, I hope that prayer is the one that opens up that checkbook. We need things, and God, you can, this is a good place. But there wasn't anything coming. Nothing happened. Because God don't work like we think he ought to work. And sometimes when we think this is the opportunity for blessing, we don't get the blessing. But here is a principle I don't want you to ever forget. They found grace in the wilderness place. It was an unexpected place of blessing. Some of you came in here today, you're in the wilderness of sickness, or you're going through a trial, and you think, well, when I come through this and God does the things he's going to do, then things are going to be better. You're in that dark place, and that's where he's coming to you. You're in that desolate place, and that's where he's going to get to you. And he's established it to his people Israel that I'm going to give you grace in the wilderness, because that's when you least expect it. You know, the desert is a dreary place. There's this monotonous. Sister Macey and I went to the Grand Canyon, and this tour we went on. They drove us through the desert, and it was like just mile after mile after mile of just nothing but sand and a few rocks. And all I could think about is we'll never be short of property in the United States. There's property out here. I don't know if you could build out there, but it was just mile after mile. It was such a dreary place. It became so monotonous. There was no change in the landscape. You know, life gets like that a lot of times. It just the unchanging monotony of going through ordinary, regular life, job and children and school and the things that you have to go through, and all of those monotonous things, just like the desert, it is the place where you don't expect God to show up. On this day today, God came into this room because there were people that had extraordinary blessings or blessings that they needed, and he chose to find you at your dreariest spot. You know, so that when you look at it, and we drove mile after mile, it was like same verse, the second verse, same as the first. It was just the same thing over and over again. Years ago, I was driving from California back. It's been many years ago, back to Houston, and I got in around Sonora and Ozona, and I had one of those cars that had the scan radio, you know, where it would scan for the station, and I thought, man, I've got to listen to something, and it's hard to just listen to the tumbleweed going, and so I said, I got to just listen to something, so I turned the radio on, I put the scan button on, and it just kept going. It never found a station. FM don't go that far. I don't know about AM, but nothing went that far. There was nothing out there. It was not the place where the deer and the antelope play. There was nothing there at all. There was no possibility of change. I drove and didn't see a car. I just kept driving. It was the same thing over and over again. And when Israel was in the desert, that's what they saw. Behind them was desert, in front of them was desert, and they were in the middle of the desert. You know what this is when you go through something like this. It just looks like it's not going to change. My circumstances are not going to change. That is the unexpected place of blessing. And the Lord said, I'll bring you grace in your wilderness. Don't you worry about it. There's death in the wilderness. You can go by the home of a loved one that has passed on, or you can go by and see where you lived as a child and family members that are gone, and the dead hope and promise of them ever returning to you. Or maybe you had a promise that you felt like God had made you, and then you feel like, well, that promise has expired. It's dead now. And maybe there were dreams that have faded through the years that you feel like can never be recaptured or recovered, and God can't even restore any of those things. You're in that desert place. You're in that place of monotony, in that place where it just always speaks of death. But it's in that place that he chose to give them grace. It was in that place he chose to come to them in a special way. There's dangers in the desert. I realized that years ago when I was traveling with my mom and dad, and I think maybe my little sister, and we were on our way to New Mexico or to California or somewhere, and we had a radiator hose that busted, and we pulled off to the side of the road and literally waited for several hours. And finally, a highway patrolman came by, and in the trunk of his car, he had some water, and he had some things to fix that up until we could get somewhere and get it. But we realized then that how dangerous the desert could be. At nighttime, there are dangers there. And in the day with the blazing sun, there would have been really a threat on our life at that moment. If you go through certain desert places, there's the trails of caravans that had gone and passed on, but bones line those, the bones of men and beasts that did not make it. That's what the desert is all about. But it's in that spot he chose to bring grace, in the wilderness place. It was the place that Israel dreaded. If you would say, which way do you want to go? You wouldn't say, give me the desert. You would say, give me the place of palm trees. Give me the place of cool springs. Let me have that. Nobody chooses the wilderness. Nobody chooses the desert. See, one of the frustrating things about serving the Lord is this, not at the Lord, but living for God, you kind of get the feeling that your life is going to be so different than everybody else's, that everybody's going to have trouble, but you're not. Everybody's going to have sickness, but you don't, because you're serving the Lord. And one of the hard, difficult things is when things start happening to you that's happening to a neighbor who doesn't serve the Lord, it's easy to get to thinking, well, what is this all about? I didn't do this. They're doing things that causes them to have trouble, but I'm not doing anything, because you don't choose the way all the time that you get to go. Sometimes you're on a path in your family. You're on a path on your job. You're on a path in your health or circumstance that you did not control. You have done nothing wrong. But when you're there in the wilderness, he said there'll be grace for you in that wilderness spot. Don't despair. God is there. In the wilderness, you can get the feeling that you're all alone. I got that feeling the other night when I was with Sister Macey. We went out to IKEA to get stuff for the little kids' bonus room, and I was on the phone talking, and this is what she said always happens, and I thought, well, I'm going to go in there and find out where she is. It's taking too much time, and so I just go in there, and I thought, well, I'll just walk around till I find her. No. Then she texted me. She said, where are you? I'm finished. I'm standing out here. I don't have a way to get in the truck. And come on. I said, I'm trying to find the exit. I followed the signs. But after a while, I realized I've walked past these desks before. What's happening with me? And so here was the fun part. The fun part was there was nobody that I could ask. I don't know how they get you to pay up. I've never bought, we bought a lot of things there, but it's never been me involved in it. But I just thought, well, can I just pick up something and just walk out? There was nobody there. And finally, after I had gone, it said exit this way. So I walked, and I'm not talking about just a few feet. I'm talking about like 2 football fields. And I got down there, and it said exit this way. So I took that exit, and I walked another football field, and it said exit. And I took that football field, and I walked over there. And finally, I saw a little lady on the ladder. And desperately, as I crawled up, my tongue hanging out, I said, where, dear one, is the exit? And she said, well, take a right at the football field, go 3 football fields to the left. And she told me, and when I finally got to the end, I saw the cash registers. I'm home and I'm free, and I was coming. And Sister Macey said, what are you doing? I said, I was trying to find you. She said, honey, you can't just walk in and find me at IKEA. I said, do you realize that people could be lost here? This is where Jimmy Hoffa is, and other people that are missing. They're at IKEA right now somewhere. They're in a cedar chest. It's a lonely place in the wilderness. No one seems to know where you are. You listen to this right here. When you start going through your wilderness place, it feels like no one knows. And it definitely feels like nobody gives a hoot about where you are and what you're going through. And you feel like, if God could speak to me, why don't he use this man, or why don't he use my pastor? Why don't he use this friend? Why don't he speak to me? If I'm with God, how come these things don't work out for me? Just like I was standing there at Dave Spence's house, Dan, thinking, this is the place that he's going to bless, because it's just the obvious place. But God will allow life to get you to the place where you're not expecting Him to give you blessing. He's not expecting Him to give you grace. Let me tell you, you can't go so far that the Lord can't find you. You've never had a valley so deep that His eye can't spot you. You can't go somewhere covered up with all kinds of things that God cannot touch you there. He will bring a blessing in an unexpected place. Amen. Hallelujah. You know, sometimes it's the loneliness of feeling that no one knows where you are, but at other times it's the loneliness. It could mean, nobody else in my family's living for the Lord but me. That's a lonely thing. I'm by myself. I can't even talk to anybody about good things that's happening because they don't want to hear about the church. And so I'm by myself. I'm lonely in this. I'm in a wilderness place. It feels empty at times, Pastor, because of where I'm at. Because in that wilderness that we went through, that desert that we went through, it was just nothing but dust and sand and rocks and stones and heat. And the springs that maybe had been there at some point had dried up. The bus driver told us, the tour guide said, at one time this was underwater in this area. Well, it had been millions of years since that had happened. There wasn't water anywhere. There was not a hint of a cloud. It was parched. It was dead. It was empty. It was void of life. And that can happen in the spiritual sense of the word. You just feel like there's nothing. I just can't do anything. I just can't make any progress. The Bible said when my people lack water and they get thirsty till their tongue cleaves to the roof of their mouth and they cannot pray, I, the Lord, will hear them. I want you to listen to this. He said when they have their tongues cleaving to the roof of their mouth, I, the Lord, will hear them. There are wordless prayers that are heard in heaven. You don't know how to say it. You don't know what to ask for. You're so thirsty you can't even get the word out, water. But the Lord said, I'll hear you, because when you're in your wilderness, He is there. When you need help, He's there. When you need an answer, He's there. He said, I will never, never leave you nor forsake you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Dust and sand and rocks, just a terrible circumstance and situation. Finding grace in the wilderness, I see it in Isaiah, the 35th chapter. What actually happens in Isaiah 35, it just says the wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, talking about God's people. And the desert shall blossom as a rose. It shall blossom abundantly, and it shall rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given unto it. The excellency of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord and the excellency of our God. Strengthen ye the weak hands and confirm the feeble knees. Say to them that are of fearful heart, be strong, fear not. Your God will come. Your God will come with a vengeance, even God with the recompense. Then the eyes of the blind shall be open, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as a hart, and the tongue of the dumb shall sing. And in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert. And the parched ground shall become a pool, and thirsty land springs of water. In the habitation of dragons, where each lay shall be grass with reeds and rushes. And a highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness, and the unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for those, the wayfaring men, though fools shall not err therein. No lion shall be there, nor any ravenous beast shall go up thereon. It shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransom of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with songs and everlasting joy upon their heads. I don't care what desert you're in. I don't care what wilderness you're in. It's fixing to break out with water. It's fixing to break out with dancing. It's fixing to break out with singing. Something's about to take place. In your desert, Keep standing with me. It's that daily provision. Said your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness. Woo! It's unexpected. How are we going to get bread from heaven when we're out here in the middle of nowhere? God will get it to you in an unexpected place. Well, you don't know I can line up all the things, Pastor, and there's 19 things right here that are in the negative. But I want to tell you, God wipes it all out with one positive. I am with you always, even to the end of the world. You're not abandoned. You're not orphaned. You're not on the outside. God's got his hand on you. Exodus 13:18. In verse 18 and verse number 21, God led the people about through the way of the wilderness. Though it was not near to go that way, but he put them in the wilderness. Sometimes it's God leading that gets us into the desert place. See, so many times people think that if it goes well, then you're in the will of God. If it goes bad, you're not in the will of God. But I'm going to tell you, there's times God leads you in a way that you get in a wilderness place and you're right in the will of God. Because what he wanted to prove to Pharaoh and what he wanted to prove to Satan and what he wanted to prove to generations that would come after is that my people can get in the middle of a desert place and I can bring water to them out of rocks. And they can be in a desert place and they don't have anything to cultivate the ground, but I'll rain manna from heaven on top of them to show you that I can provide in an unexpected place. Some of you today, you need this today. You've gone through things. You're beaten down, beat up. You feel like it's impossible. God will never do it. It'll never happen. I don't think it can go this way, Pastor. I just don't know if it'll ever be different. But God has a purpose for his people. Here's what he said. Go south to Gaza, which is the desert. Well, that don't sound right. You would think he would have said, go the way of the beautiful streams. But he said, go to Gaza, which is the desert. Well, what do you mean? Wait a minute. Is that the way God would lead his? Why would God lead his people to the desert? To show you and show everybody around you. You can be where they think nothing can change, and God can change the situation. He took the bitter waters of Marah, that when they were so thirsty, they went to drink it, but it was poisonous, bitter waters, and they could not even drink out of it, and they thought they were about to die. And he told Moses, you see that tree? Cut the tree down and throw it down in that water. And when he threw it into the water, the bitter waters became sweet. That wasn't just for them. That was so that I could tell you here today, there's something about the tree at Golgotha that when it's laid into your life, what has been bitter before will be sweet after that, because the cross can make the difference. That's what he was talking about. It wasn't just to provide a need at that moment, but that was to let you know wildernesses are nothing for God. Desert places are not a place God can't get to you. You may not have cellular service. There may not be satellite passing over you to be able to pinpoint where you are. But with God, he needs no GPS. He needs no way to pinpoint where you are. The very hairs of your head are numbered. He saw you when you got out of bed this morning and said, God, I got to have something today. And because of that, he came prepared. He came ready. If you'll close your eyes and bow your heads for just a minute today. I'm not preaching today just to those that don't have the Lord and a sinner that does not have the Lord. But if you're in this building today and you need God to do something, I want to erase the stigma of coming forward for prayer. I want to erase that. Our ministry team always gets ready, and our altar team gets prepared, and they're already here usually before you make it down to the front. But many times the stigma of coming for prayer is that people are going to think that I'm doing something wrong. And that's why I'm crying, and that's why I'm praying. I rebuke that spirit in Jesus' name. Because there are times I'm weeping and I haven't done one thing wrong, but it's what's being done to me. And today, if you've got something that you've been carrying, the burden of your family, just something breaking your heart day after day after day, It's time to come out of that pew and get out of the aisle and just walk down to the front. They'll pray with you, but you can just come and raise your hands. The unexpected place of blessing is the wilderness, and where you are, God's going to find you. If you'll get your hands up, He'll be able to pick you up. Get your hands in the air and say, God, do something with me today. Just make your way here and say, Lord, I got to have an answer. God, there's something happening on my job. I've got to have an answer. God, my kids are breaking my heart. I've got to have an answer.